Oh, Manic and Chill, we're back. I don't know when you're going to be saying this. I always feel like it's a hostage video when I start these because I'm like I have no idea when you're going to see this. I don't know if I'll be alive or dead because we don't know what Addison's going to do. We don't know what Addison Hayes is going to do. He's going to release it when he wants to. This could come out in September for all we know. But we're back. Another Manic and Chill. We got at Charles Chill FFB, also known as Scott Connor, and at Shane is the worst. Also known as at Shane is the worst. Um, Dynasty Trades HQ, Dynasty and Chill, Chasing the Helmet, Dynasty Trades HQ, and Dynasty and Chill massive football league we got going. So I reached out to some of our patrons. We each got a patron, and reached out to them, and they gave us some message, some questions that I was going to run by you because you're a smart guy and people like to hear you answer questions. But first, I guess, how are you doing?
Good. That was your best introduction that we've ever had on this show, and I think it's maybe the fourth or fifth time that you've led the show off. And kudos, you're getting better. You're learning, my friend. You're learning. Great job. Great job. But I'm doing well. Glad to be back.
So I've learned a trick about hosting, right? And it just hit me. You don't actually have to know anything or do any real work when you're hosting. You just have questions. You go, well, what do you think, guest? And then you go, oh, okay, good points. And then if they say something stupid, you just jump in and be like, you're wrong. So that's why I think people like hosting.
I think hosting, it's definitely, we're not talking football yet, but it's definitely one of those things where the host chair and like the guest, or you're the one doing the analysis, but you're not carrying like the intro and the conclusion and the transitions from topic to topic. It's definitely a different skill. I'm not even particularly that good at it. I just do it because I started off Dynasty and Chill as a solo show, and I'm like, I have to do it because I'm the only
Yeah,
one talking.
yeah.
But yeah, it's there's some good ones. I mean, Calvin and Hobby, you got to give
Yeah.
that guy credit. Like that dude, I'm
Calvin's great.
jealous when I listen to his transition skills. Like he can carry a broadcast and he knows when to interject with like his own opinion, but he doesn't even need to interject it that much. But that guy's got skill. I got to give him credit.
It keeps everyone involved. Like he can see when your eyes start wandering or that you're playing on Twitter on your computer, and
Shane,
yeah,
yeah.
he gets you back in. So yeah, so if you're not following Cal, make sure you are, and if you're not subscribed to the DLF YouTubes, make sure you are so you can see Cal because I think he's on every day, 6 times a day on YouTube.
Yeah, all the time. Way more than we are, way more consistent, much more reliable. I'm sure DLF agrees.
Yeah, definitely. So we got a couple questions. Let's get into them. I want to get into them. First question: to what extent would you be willing to weaken your starting lineup to accept a trade that you went on value? So I guess we'll make this simpler, right? Let's say you got I don't know, Chase Edmonds, and he's going to be your running back too. Would you trade him? Would you trade him? Knowing that the next one, let's say the next running back in your chamber would be, say, a Kenyon Drake.
Well, I mean, there's always a caveat to every question, but my answer when I saw this question was, for me personally, yes, but I'm also playing in 60 leagues now. So when you're playing with a big portfolio, I'm somebody that's always going to say, if it's a good value in the deal, I'm willing to disrupt my specific team a little bit to just accumulate the value. I mean, I said that earlier on Twitter. Basically, if I always am just accumulating value and nothing else matters, points, championships, they'll follow eventually. Maybe not in every league, but they'll follow. Now, we're probably speaking to people that only have 2 or 3 leagues. I literally was just talking about this in our Patreon chat for a second ago. If I'm only in 1 league, I can still take a portfolio approach. I can still say, well, Chase Edmonds, it's a great deal if I can get 2 seconds or a first for him. You know what I mean? Like if it's a smash deal, it's really easy for you to say, yep, I'll just take it. But if you're only in 1 league and he is your RB2, I can see where it's going to feel a little bit more difficult to just take it and say, I'll worry about it later. Now, the contrary would be if it's good value. I mean, if he's your RB2, how worried are you on the impact that trade's going to have on your team? You know, if he's your RB2, how far removed is he from what's available maybe on the waiver wire? Depends on your settings. A shallower league, there's probably enough guys I can pick up with volume that might be able to make up for Chase Edmonds that I'd rather take the pick. So I think all those things matter, but still, you're just walking a fine line. You and I will trade anybody. If there's a reason, if there's an angle of why we want to trade the player because we're getting a good price, I'll do it. Especially if I say I have Chase Edmonds on 20% of my teams. Well, yeah, I'll trade one. I'm actively trying to probably trade one at that case. But it doesn't mean that, if I'm only in 2 leagues, I still might consider it. It just depends. It depends on how much you can stomach disrupting your roster construction for a good deal. So I think that's the best answer. But yeah, if you're in a lot of leagues, I think you always take the good deal. I mean, that's the portfolio approach in a nutshell.
So I like the portfolio approach. I'm more of a all or nothing type of guy. I will always trade the fringe player for the better value, even if it hurts my starting lineup. And the thinking behind that is, one, if the difference between me and a championship is Chase Edmonds or a Chase Edmonds-ish player, Mike Davis, James Robinson, etc., I'm probably not a championship team anyway, to be quite frank with you. And I know that this fun story is you just make it to the playoffs and anything can happen. Great, but I can also make it to the playoffs and continually get knocked out in the first round because I keep making it there with guys like Chase Edmonds. To me, you always trade those players because you always want to build the value. And like you said, when you get the value, the wins, the points come later. If I'm always improving my weakest roster spots, eventually my weakest roster spots will still be fairly strong. If I continue to flip guys like Chase Edmonds for a second and continue to flip guys like Mike Davis for a second, Travis Fulgham last year when he was going crazy for 4 weeks, trade those guys and get an asset that, well, in a pick, I know is going to increase. And it probably makes sense when you do that for pick as opposed to another player, because then you're just, making another gamble on a different player.
Well, and I think also if you're talking a running back that's in this range, Mike Davis, Chase Edmonds, Darrell Henderson, I mean, there's a lot of names you could probably say are in that range. They're more replaceable. RB2s, RB3s are replaceable, and they're the least impactful when it comes to ever wanting to flex them. So it's not like you want to collect these guys and say, well, I can start 4 or 5 of them at once. Just in a PPR league, that's going to be suboptimal. You're probably going to want to be starting wide receivers most of the time in your flex. So if you take it that the RB2 is the least impactful position, and if you're just talking like a 12-team start 10, that's just PPR. We're not talking about some crazy point per carry, 2 PPR for tight ends, where it totally throws the flexes out of the whack. We've talked about that before. But if you're just talking about like a stock PPR league, you really don't want to ever play more than 2 running backs. And you kind of want to trim down your running backs at these value spots as much as you can. You want to accumulate the guys like Chase Edmonds on the cheap. You want to find the next Chase Edmonds that's going for a third right now, or guys you can pick up on waivers in shallower leagues. So it's almost like a turn and burn roster spot already. It doesn't matter if it's Chase Edmonds or, I'll put another one out there to you, Michael Carter. I know you don't like Michael Carter, but he, I think, has a higher value track than Chase Edmonds does. At least he has higher value potential than Chase Edmonds. But I think the impact of him on your roster and even his ceiling, I don't see Michael Carter ever being like a consensus RB1 in Dynasty. He might be able to get into the teens. If he has a really good rookie year, this community is going to bump him up a little bit. But I think he's going to be in that range where he's always going to be. Reminds me kind of like Kenyon Drake, like maybe that type where he could reach RB 16, 17, 18, 20, but that's it. Like, I don't know if he can go a lot higher than that. So that roster spot in among itself, your RB2 on your roster, you're almost always turning that around if you can. If it ever gets to a point where it's worth a first, to me, that's gone. Unless it's you just have 2 really good running backs or 3 really good running backs, then fine. Then you can charge a higher premium. But if you get Darrell Henderson, Michael Carter, Trey Sermon even, these guys raise into that range where they're like locked in dynasty RB2s, even in the short term, I think you just cash out just based on principle.
And I don't know if we've actually discussed this before, but I feel like we have. I think we've talked about the fact that despite what we'd like to believe and what we hope, only a finite amount of players actually are going to matter at every position. And it's usually 6 at running back, 6 at wide receiver, 3 at tight end and 10 at quarterback, 10 or 12, give or take. And everyone after that is literally interchangeable. They are all the same guy. So you want to take, in my view, you always want to get the stronger asset. Whether that's based off of whether the market thinks that's based off of production or whatever. I just want whatever the stronger asset is. To me, a rookie pick is always going to be a stronger asset than a fringe player like Chase Edmonds, Mike Davis, Darrell Henderson. Although, and I understand the point of holding on to those guys to try to get a first. Although I don't think you can get that with Mike Davis. You might be able to do it with Henderson because at least he has a runway and a path where you could say, well, Cam Akers will never be the same player again, whereas Mike Davis is 29 years old. So yeah, it's situational. I guess you can't be completely binary, but except in the sense that you should always be looking to sell those guys. You should always be looking to sell wide receiver twos. You should always be looking to sell running back twos because those are replaceable players. And what you want is the elite of the elite. Like I said, there's only, if I'm not great at math, I'm guessing about 23 actual players, 24 players that actually move the needle in fantasy football by themselves.
Well, and I think another thing that we haven't really talked about is even if you think you're getting a fair market price, like obviously if you're only in 2 leagues, but you get an offer of a first and a second for Chase Edmonds, like that's one where you're going to have to do a double take and say, wow, I don't care what my team looks like. I'm just going to take it sight unforeseen because the value is too good. But I think almost the better question would be, let's say you have a contending team and you get an offer of a single first for Cortland Sutton. Okay. Now I know he's a receiver, but we're just going to talk about receivers that are in that range where it probably takes a first to buy them. But it's a good debate as to whether you would sell for a first. I think you'd have to evaluate your team a little bit. Now, for me, I look at that and say the benefit that I'm getting is, can I replace some sort of intrinsic value with what I'm going to pick up for free on the waiver wire? How deep is the team in terms of, how many roster spots do I have to play with? Because I think sometimes you can get a dead even trade where I say, Shane, is this a fair trade? You're like, yep, that's a square trade, both sides. Like I can see both sides of that deal. But sometimes you can get an intrinsic victory just based on the fact that you've added flexibility to your roster, right? You have an extra pick in the coffer that you can hold. Now the only challenge you have is, how do I replace Cortland Sutton's production or whoever I'm trading away? Can I do that cheaper? Can I go buy Emmanuel Sanders for a 3rd round pick and just try to get by for one season? You know what I mean? Like you can be a little more creative, and I think that's where you can gain some leverage for the future. Because ultimately, if you're dealing in running back twos, wide receiver twos, wide receiver threes, wide receiver fours, it's exactly what you said. My goal is eventually to take a shot that pick could be in a spot where, okay, now I can pick in the top 5 next year, and I have a shot to really draft an impact player, or not even an impact player. Zach Wilson, Justin Fields could be impact players. They might not be, but you know what? Right now on the market, they're impact players. So you've colored up your asset value, and it usually comes at a non-running back or a non-wide receiver position, especially receivers. So that's something I've talked about a lot, where if you can flip receivers just at their market price, the idea is if you don't necessarily just want to draft receivers in the future, especially if you're in some of these crazy leagues where the quarterback scoring is really high or whatever, the idea, if I can turn that pick into not a receiver, a different position, my only chance to do it is probably through the draft. I'm not going to be able to trade a receiver for an elite quarterback or a receiver for an elite running back. So that's something else to think about, is what else are you gaining in the trade besides the value? Are you freeing up a roster spot? Are you changing maybe your roster construction a little bit? Those things can matter as well.
And here's the fun thing on your roster. And I just, for fun, went in the MFL to look up the rostership of people that have Cortland Sutton. Apparently, I'm not one of those people. I don't know how that's possible. I apparently don't have Cortland Sutton in one MFL.
You have none on all your teams? None?
None in the MFLs. I might have them in. I got to check out Dynasty Planet, see if I've got them. I feel like I have them in some sleeper leagues of mine. So I was just looking at some of the rosters and some of the other wide receivers guys have on their rosters, where they also own Cortland Sutton, Mike Williams, Laviska Shenault, Samuel, Marquise Brown, Brandon Ayuk. You literally have 7 guys that are the same person. So even if you wanted to follow up that trade, say you traded something for a first, or any of those guys, you were able to trade any of those types of players for a first. You do that, and then you try to package one of those other receivers that's another clone of the Cortland Sutton that you have on your roster, and that first, and you try to work your way up to get to a Jamar Chase, a wide receiver 10, or if you're looking for someone with a little more production behind them, someone that's actually done it for a long time, like let's see what we got, guys that did it 1 year last year, like CD Lamb, like that's what you got to do, is get the assets so that you can move up to get receivers like that, where eventually you're starting guys like CD Lamb, DK Metcalf, and you're not going to get all these guys in the rookie draft, so you have to make moves outside of that. Rather than just completely overpaying all the time. You just make small incremental moves so you can bundle some of these clone wide receivers. And that's what I think I'll call them. They're all just clones. Trade some of these clone wide receivers for guys that are actually unique and different.
Yeah, and you threw one name in there, Brandon Ayuk. You threw him in there as a clone wide receiver, and that's, some people have much stronger feelings on Ayuk, so maybe we'll talk about that on a future show. But I did want to make this point while you're talking about that. Right now, we're probably seeing it in a lot of leagues. I know I am, where once you get outside of the top 30, and we've talked about this a little before about you trying to shop Robert Woods as one of those guys where it's just, I mean, obviously he's 29, so there's a bias against him simply because of his age. But he's already moved into that range where, and there's others in the range too. Guys like Odell Beckham, Tyler Boyd, Deebo Samuel, even Laviska Shenault. Maybe Shenault has a little bit of more hype at this point. Tyler Lockett. Like everybody outside of like the top 30 or so, you can't really get first for those guys. And that was one of the things that I forecasted that wouldn't necessarily happen, but it has. Most of the dynasty community has gotten smarter. I've gone out and said, okay, I got Tyler Boyd. I love Tyler Boyd. I think he could be a top 24 receiver, maybe higher. But if you're going to sell him to me, or if I'm going to sell him to you for a first, I'm going to take it. Almost sight unforeseen. It doesn't matter the format. It doesn't matter how many receivers I can start. Anybody in that range, you can argue they're worth selling for an individual first. You know what's funny? Like a month ago, I had too many Elijah Moore shares. I had 10 shares. Spammed for a first in every league. All declined. Think I could do it now? Maybe. But, that's the point, is if you can get first.
I'm a little surprised you weren't able to then, but I guess because, what was there, that 1 week window when he was practicing before OTAs or whatever.
No, yeah, this was like June. It wasn't anything to do with the current hype, but it was, everyone knew I didn't pay a first in the draft, so they wouldn't give a future first for Elijah Moore. And you know what? There's now specific formats, start 12, where I can start 8 receivers. I would consider giving a first for Elijah Moore. I know it's a suboptimal move, but there are specific formats where he's moved into that range just because he does have, of all the guys that are in that probably outside the top 30, obviously if they're rookies or even second year guys that have produced a little bit, they have a higher potential value ceiling, right? They could blow up. Tyler Boyd's not going to blow up and his value's not going to double. Doesn't matter what he does, it's not going to happen. And there's many other guys, Curtis Samuel, the same thing. These guys can be solid, but they don't really have a ceiling. And I know we get into this debate all the time on Twitter, but it's like, you see these guys that don't produce right away, the Jalen Ragers, the Michael Pittmans, and I don't want to say they didn't produce because they flashed a little bit. Is it fair to say? I mean, their ceilings capped. It just is. Is there anything? I'll bring Jalen Rager up because I got into it on Twitter about Jalen Rager. Is there anything Jalen Rager can do this year to become a wide receiver that's worth a first plus? Is there anything he can do shy of being like literally lighting the world on fire? It would be a 1% outcome for him to be like a top 12 receiver.
He'd have to put up DJ Chark's sophomore season. And
okay.
Even DJ Chark, you weren't able to sell him for a first, and you were still able to buy him for a second most of the season until probably like week 8 or 9, and people were like, "Oh, this is a thing now. He's going to do this every week."
So I think you could have maybe sold DJ Chark for a first, but that was also before 2 rookie classes that just brought in like 30 day 2 receivers. So that was like last February or March. That was before the 2020 class and the 2021 class, which basically accounts for like 13 of the top 50 receivers right now. So it's just become saturated to where even if Jalen Reagor goes out and he is a top 24 receiver, that's about where he's going to settle. Maybe like wide receiver 30, wide receiver 25-ish. But those guys are barely worth first. And that's probably like the absolute best outcome you could hope for him. So I kind of look at it and say, you know, the gamble price on him, you probably got to pay a future second plus to get him. But if you can get that, I mean, I think you're taking the better side of the bet with most of those guys. Ruggs, Reagor, Pittman, McCole Hardman has a life for a 3rd year now, apparently. But I think you just cash out on those guys. You may whiff, but if you just take from a process standpoint, if you just sell all those wide receiver 3s, 4s, and 5s for the best draft pick you can probably get, that's probably a pretty good bet, especially the ones that haven't produced before. Because that's why their value's low. Tyler Boyd, Robert Woods, Adam Thielen, those guys' value's low because they've been around. They don't really have any value ceiling. But all the other guys, man, there's so many of them that are you can get. If you can cash out, find the person in your league that likes any of those guys I named. Gabriel Davis is another one. Brian Edwards. Find the person that likes them and just cash out, you know?
They're literally all the same guy. I mean, and you know, we're in a startup now, and someone just sent me a message. He says, "Hey, you want to trade up now?" After, you know, we weren't able to pull off a trade several picks ago, and I go, "No, literally everyone else on the board for the next 3 rounds is the same guy. Doesn't matter what position they play, what, you know, if it's running back, tight end, wide receiver, they're literally all the same guy. They're all the same value. It doesn't matter if I draft him here in the 5th round or if I draft him in the 7th round. Why pay extra? I'll just wait for the 7th round and get whichever one's available to me, because chances are it's going to be someone I like anyway, because at this point of the draft, it's people are picking more based on I believe and I like, than the, you know, in the beginning rounds where it's AJ Brown and it's like, well, no, I know he's a wide receiver 1. It's guys like, you know, that I think could be a wide receiver 1. He maybe one day could do it. Back to the Reagor thing, you know, I always find it interesting looking at a player like Juju Smith-Schuster, who climbed up to probably wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3. He was definitely a top 4 wide receiver. And you look at him now and he's wide receiver 22. And he's a guy that I also think he's already in that range of players that wouldn't matter what he does. I can't see him ever climbing above wide receiver 15, because now there's at least that once there's a bad memory out there in the public, it's hard for a player to ever regain that value.
Well, but I think the fall of a player like Juju after how hard he rose after his first year, same with guys like DJ Moore, like the drop is a lot softer for those guys, takes a lot longer. Whereas these guys that didn't do anything right away, it's really hard to get that bad taste out of dynasty owners' mouth to where they say, okay, I can forgive it. I mean, you mentioned DJ Chark, but he's one of the few. And it doesn't help that one outlier example that people use as, well, this guy did nothing as a rookie and then he smashed as a sophomore. It doesn't help that guy then kind of went back to being not very good as a 3rd-year player. Right. So that's really not the greatest outlier example anymore. Because it's like if everyone took DJ Chark's career track, you'd sell the heck out of every player that did anything after their rookie year. So I don't know. I don't know if it's the right way to approach it, but there is serious merit to, if these guys don't hit right away, and it's a lot of pressure. I mean, I know I was going back and forth with Ray Garvin the other day about this, and I'm like, you know, I love Elijah Moore, Rashad Bateman, Ron. I like this year's rookie wide receiver class. After Chase, the next 6, I think all of them could have really special rookie years. I love Terrace Marshall, you know, especially Moore and Marshall. Those 3 guys, along with Bateman, are all super young. But as much as we might like them right now, if they go out and post 300 yards as a rookie, then what?
Well, we already know what. We already
But
seen
you
one.
can't get stuck in going, well, he was only 21 and I'll give him another year. That might be fair for an NFL team to say, hey, we're going to work him in. We don't expect him to be a full-time route runner year one. For Dynasty, though, the community already starts to sour on that guy if he can't beat out so-and-so that's been there for 4 years. If Elijah Moore cannot outproduce Corey Davis, who is in his 5th year and really has never finished inside the top 24, he's going to go down. It doesn't matter what his profile said. And that sucks. That's a lot of pressure on these guys, because the other thing is with Rager, with Pittman, with Ruggs, those guys got hurt. They missed games. So it's like, okay, they had an injury in training camp. They missed 4 or 5 games. Rager missed like 9 games. Pittman missed 6 games or whatever it was. Like, do you hold that against them? But when you're talking large sample sizes, it doesn't matter. It's a whiff. It's a miss. That's it.
That's what I was about to say. I mean, you know the answer to that. Like, you've looked at the data. We both have looked at the data. There's a threshold you have to hit. It just is. It does not matter why you didn't hit it. And that's the other thing that's been interesting. Everyone has a story as to why they couldn't do it one year. And then people remember Demaryius Thomas and Tyler Boyd breaking out in their 3rd and 4th years or whatever it was, and try to tell you that happens all the time. That never happens. Literally never happens. I think when you showed the data, it was something like 6 receivers had ever broken out after busting in their first year. Something ridiculous like that.
And I'll correct you on that a little bit. Tyler Boyd actually had a good rookie year. He only scored. He didn't score a touchdown, but he had almost 600 yards as a rookie. What happened? His value track is he had 50 plus catches and almost 600 yards as a rookie. So it wasn't a whiff. But he's like DJ Chark. He is an outlier because in year 2, they still had AJ Green. He was the alpha, right? So you kind of already hurt Tyler Boyd's ceiling a little bit because AJ Green was there. But then they draft John Ross in the top 10 the next year. And we just said, oh, well, they must think Tyler Boyd sucks. And he just goes down. So he dropped. And then, you know what? He wasn't good as a sophomore. He got benched. That was a pretty highly publicized story about how he got benched. And he even came out and said, I don't know why I'm not playing. Now you look back and you go, yeah, that probably was a pretty stupid decision by Marvin Lewis to bench him. He's clearly a good player, but he's an outlier. Most of the other guys, and he's one of those guys that accounted for like 3 of those 13 seasons after a whiff in year 1. Like 3 of the 13 seasons have been Tyler Boyd. And he's really kind of one of those where if you dig deep into the data, you can say he is an outlier. He is. And Golden Tate was another one. Same thing. It's like, okay, but at what point did you realize Golden Tate's probably pretty good? Was it his 5th straight year when he was a top 30 receiver? So Tyler Boyd, I'm fine. He's a good player. I would say he's probably going to be the same guy for the next 3 or 4 years. But after that rookie year and then into his sophomore year, his value was just his ceiling was capped. Period. Dynasty owners will never rise it to a certain level higher than where it was.
Yeah, so let's take Tyler Boyd out of the equation, but just
okay.
To the more overarching point, if a wide receiver busts in year 1, it almost does not matter. Not almost. It doesn't matter why. It does not matter why.
Yeah, exactly.
It's injuries. It's their quarterback was injured. There was an earthquake in San Francisco that swallowed the earth whole. Doesn't matter. They generally, like 90% of the time, do not bounce back, and you'd always be better off just selling them, even at a loss. Because even if you can get a second rounder, and I know that hurts, because look, you're like, I just spent 108 on Jalen Reagor last year, and it's not his fault that he got injured, and it's not his fault that Carson Wentz was bad, and I think he could bounce back. But the problem is there's 14 other receivers in the league with the same story. Well, if Michael Pittman didn't get hurt, if he had a better quarterback than Phil Rivers, who could throw deeper than 7 yards down the field. James Washington had another one. He had a rookie year where you're like, oh, well, if they would have just incorporated him more, but he's on a loaded depth chart, so it's not really his fault. It doesn't matter. These guys don't hit. It's amazing, because you would think there would be more success stories, because some of these sound like legitimate reasons, but they end up just being excuses. And then, of course, what's going to happen is one of these 15 receivers that had a bad rookie year, like Ruggs or Edwards or not Mims, maybe Mims, Ruggs, Edwards, Mims, Rager. One of them's going to hit, and then someone's going to throw that out in my face and be like, well, this guy hit. And then I'll just have to point out, yeah, well, that's 1 out of 10. it's not worth it. If you always sell those guys, you're going to be right 90% of the time. And
Well, and let's also clarify, we're talking guys that had high draft capital. We're talking about guys that were valued high in rookie drafts already.
right.
Where, you look at a guy, like another guy that I'm looking that's in this range is Gabriel Davis. He's a top 50 receiver. Now, I still think he'd be a player you would sell, but he was 21. He was a 4th round pick. Arguably, he was legitimately on a depth chart where he was the 4th option. And he still, relative to most of his other peers, outproduced all of those guys. So, yes, he's probably a sell. But after this year, if he still is doing the same thing that he did last year, then his value is going to go down. But I do think if you just evaluate his situation over some of those other guys, he's a 4th round pick. You know what I mean? It's a little bit different. The acquisition cost was lower, but still, I don't necessarily look at that the same way as I would a guy that was a 1st rounder. So that it's going to be interesting.
No.
You mentioned a bunch of names. Michael Pittman was one. Gabe Davis was another one. There's many others. We're still waiting for Michael Gallup is another one that you kind of thought the same thing. And repeatedly.
He did break out in year 2.
Exactly. No, but he's one of those that would have fit the same range. Like he was a 2nd round rookie pick. But where did he go after his 2nd year and his 3rd year? You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like the best case scenario for some of these guys. If they have a really good year 2, they're still going to kind of linger in that like wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range. Darnell Mooney is another one. Like we'll end this topic here, but basically sell these guys, shop them. I don't want to just take seconds for all these guys if I can, but there's spots where I would take seconds for them, a couple of them. If I have 3 or 4 of them on one roster, take a second for the one that you don't believe in. Take a second for the one that you have multiple shares of. See if you can add a 2nd to get a 1st. See if you can add a 3rd to get a 1st. I mean, see if you can add 2 players to get a 1st. I mean, you got to be creative, but I think generally tons of leagues, tons of shares of these guys, sell. You'll be happier.
But it's funny. I'm maybe I have OCD and ADD issues. I can't pay attention to what's going on. So every once in a while I'll space out, and I just happened to go on to the Twitters here, and we got someone asking me specifically, 12-team 1 quarterback rebuild. Give a 2022 first for a Brandon Ayuk.
I mean, it is a 1 QB league, so I don't hate it. I know you're probably on the opposite, but it's a 1 QB league. Are you giving up your own first if it's a rebuild? That makes no sense to me. No. But it is a 1 QB league, man. 1 QB, if it's not like massive tight end premium, which it's probably not. If they haven't evolved to super flex, then it's probably just PPR. That's different. I think I'd probably go with Ayuk, honestly, because it just doesn't excite me when you're just talking about a draft of all wide receivers and running backs,
Yeah, I get you. And my answer to him is I asked him a bunch of other questions because honestly, that's what we always do to you, myself and Scott. If you ask us questions, if we truly care, we're probably going to ask you 17 questions because that colors the opinion, colors our answers, I should say. Scott's looking around. He's going to have to wrap up soon, I think. So we'll just make this a 1-topic episode this week, I think. I liked it. It was fun. It was short. It was only 33 minutes. So DLF World, that's at Charles Chill FFB. Scott Connor. At Shane is the worst. You can find him on Dynasty and Chill and Chasing the Helmet. You can find me on Dynasty Trades HQ and Dynasty Intervention. Go join both of our patrons. And that's all I have. And Scott, any parting words before we leave the universe this evening?
No, that's it. We'll try to actually do another show next week and hit a couple of those patron topics that came up. Different positions. Obviously, we hit receivers pretty hard tonight, but we could probably turn this into an hour-long show. But good stuff. We'll talk other positions next time. Later, DLF.
Hit subscribe.